everyone, Kelly here, and I just have to say that my husband cut my hair today, and I think he did a pretty good job. I mean, I will be excited when I get my vaccine and can actually go into a real salon, but you know, for being a guy that basically buzzes his hair all the time, I think he did all right. And it was really getting a lot of split ends and was getting like really long. I don't know if you remember that. And yeah, so it feels nice to have it trimmed up a little bit and get rid of some of the unevenness. So yeah, I don't know, for a COVID haircut, I think it's all right. So anyways, today I want to talk about the books that I have read in the first half of March. I will say that I have read some new releases, but I'm going to wait another week before talking about those because I want to kind of put all my new releases for the month in one video, and I have a couple that I'm in the middle of right now. So none of these are 2021 releases, and the majority of them are middle grade. I think in this pile there's only one, maybe two that don't count for middle grade March. And the reason I say maybe two is that I read one meaning it to be for middle grade March, but it felt more young adult. So I have like 2 young adult and the rest are all middle grade. So I think I want to do this in order from the ones I didn't like up to the ones I loved, because there were some duds in this. But first I want to cover, I read 4 by one author, so I want to go in those in order of kind of like how I like them, and then I'll go through the rest of them. So that one author was Roald Dahl. I've been kind of in each of the middle grade Marches for the last few years, been reading through my collection of Roald Dahl books from childhood, seeing which ones are still appropriate for my kids to read, because they're approaching the age where they could be read, these books, but some of them I just know don't have things that I want to pass on to my kids, and I wanted to see which ones I keep and which ones I give away, and that they're better kept in the past. And these were 2 of his shorter ones, so I actually ended up listening to these in audiobook, but it was a collection of 4 shorter works of his and 1 audiobook. So I'm going to talk about all 4 of them. I only own 2, and then there was 2 other short stories in there. So starting with the one I liked the least was The Enormous Crocodile, and this was really sad because it was narrated by Stephen Fry. The Roald Dahl books are all have amazing narrators, and they're really good as audiobooks if you prefer that medium. So I was like excited because Stephen Fry is a great narrator, but this was a 2-star story. It was just boring and not really any substance. This is really short. I think it's only a half hour long. So brief synopsis is that it's about a crocodile that wants to eat some juicy children, and so he is setting up some tricks so that he can get kids close enough to eat them. And it's just very repetitive and not interesting. So 2 stars, won't be reading that with my kids. And then next is Esio, Trot, which is about a man who's in love with his neighbor, and his neighbor is very focused on her pet tortoise, and she really wants to see him grow bigger. And so the man devises this like scheme to make that happen and win the heart of his neighbor. And this is definitely one that I won't be passing on to my kids. 1, because I thought it wasn't that interesting in general. I gave it 3 stars. And even though it was like okay enough, entertaining for me, I wouldn't pass it on to my children, because basically the whole point of this is to trick people into liking you. And so I don't think it's one that I want to pass on to my kids, but it was entertaining enough to listen to. And then next was The Giraffe and the Pelly and Me, and this was narrated by Hugh Laurie, who plays House. And yeah, this one was just kind of boring as well. So this selection of 4 stories was not going well. So this was also 3 stars. I'm not going to be keeping this. There was nothing really offensive in this book. It was just not that interesting of a story. Like, it's just about this boy who meets this giraffe and this pelican and this monkey, and they're window washers, and they go and wash some windows and have some adventures, but just nothing really happens. I mean, there was nice quirky characters, but there are other better books, I think, to pass on to my kids. That this one, I think I'd get bored if I had to read this out loud to my kids. So it just wasn't of the caliber that I want to keep it. So this is moving on, 3 stars. And then the one I actually did enjoy of the collection was Fantastic Mr. Fox. And I loved the listening experience. And I was reading this, like looking at the pictures while listening. And that was great because I loved the illustrations in this. And this is narrated by Chris O'Dowd. And I can't think of what he was in right now, but I'll put a picture of him here. But he has an Irish accent. And so listening to his accent, and he does amazing voices for all of the farmers and the animals. I forgot to say what this is about. This is about a fox who is being hunted by these 3 farmers because he eats their chickens and ducks and things like that. And they, you know, kind of surround his hole in the ground, his den. And so he has to outwit the farmers in order to save his family. And like I said, I really enjoyed this experience. It was 4 stars to me, but I will not be rushing to read this to my kids. Maybe when they get older, to the age where they could read this themselves and we can have maybe a discussion about it, I would pass it along. But with my kid being at the age where I'm reading aloud to her and she's only 6, I won't be reading this one to her anytime soon. This will wait a couple years because there was a lot of content that is not, she's not ready to have those discussions yet. In my opinion, there was a lot of guns because they're hunters. There was, the main point is that he, you know, outwits them by stealing, and there was also underage drinking in this. So not exactly something I want to expose to my 6-year-old, but maybe someday, since it is entertaining, we might read it together and like discuss the why those things aren't okay, but like it's a fun book. So I get that sometimes Roald Dahl books are entertaining but still have questionable stuff. So I just say that those that I still think have some value, I would want to wait till they're a little older to have those discussions. And so 6-year-old is not ready for this one yet, but I will be keeping it for later. I also love, this is my copy from childhood, and so it has my maiden name in it and everything. But then I also love when I find little things. This happened to me last year when I was reading one of the Roald Dahl books. I found a bookmark from my teacher back in like 3rd grade. And this time I found a McDonald's coupon that has been in there since 1992. So I guess I never used my coupon and it's too late now. So now moving past Roald Dahl, the rest of these are just in the order of which I like them. So the one that was the most disappointing to me was In the Shadow of Blackbirds by Kat Winters. And this is really sad. I did this as a buddy read with Tia and all the books, and I really enjoyed our buddy read and the discussions we had, but I really just didn't like this book, which is sad because I had just bought this as part of my Gothic book haul towards the end of 2020, and I was really looking forward to it because I really wanted kind of like the ghosty, creepy vibes. And this was, I also got this one because I had heard on other people's booktube channels that it had these like creepy pictures and stuff in there, and I did enjoy the creepy pictures, but it couldn't carry the story. So this takes place in the 1918 influenza epidemic, which is another reason why I bought it and wanted to read it now, because it seems pretty pertinent to our current situation. And you know, also this would have been, you know, during World War I. So it's about this teenager that named Mary Shelley, and she is sent to go live with her aunt because her dad gets arrested for being kind of anti-war. So she goes to live with her aunt. Her aunt lives in the same area where her childhood sweetheart lives, but her childhood best friend and first love, he's away at war, and so she connects with his family. His brother is profiting off of people's grief, basically. He's a spirit photographer, so he's taking pictures of people and saying that you know, they'll see the spirits of their loved ones that have died through the pandemic or during the war in the photography. And Mary Shelley is kind of out to show that he is a fraud and stuff like that. So there were some interesting elements in that summary. I was really excited, but then I just thought that this was pretty boring. I did not find Mary Shelley to be an interesting main character. I didn't love the whole love story aspect. I found it pretty weird. Like, I don't want to give any spoilers away of like what makes the relationship weird, but yeah, I didn't feel any connection to her and her childhood sweetheart at all. I didn't feel like there was enough buildup of the relationship and made it seem like it was this big point, but I'm like, we're not seeing how they like fell in love or what they love about each other, so it just made their interactions really weird. I did like the spiritual photography aspect because I know that really was something that was like a craze at the time. And I did enjoy the aspects of it being during a pandemic because even from the very beginning, the first chapter, I felt like a connection with the story because she's like traveling on a train to her aunt's house. Everybody's wearing masks and one person coughs and like everybody in the train goes still, and like just that feeling of like, does that person have the flu and all that. So obviously we can relate to that now, but it was so funny because obviously she didn't actually write this having experienced a pandemic, because there were times in this when I'm like, put your mask on, people. And there was just like times when they would talk about the necessity to wear a mask, and there's people dying all around them from the flu. And there are times when she just willy-nilly is going out and being exposed to people that could have the flu, and she's like, I don't need to wear my mask at this time and all this stuff. So there were things that maybe made it worse reading this during our current climate. But yeah, anyways, I'm talking a lot about this. I didn't enjoy it. I gave it 2 stars. Yeah. So moving on, pretty much the rest of these are middle grade. So next I read The Brave by James Byrd. This was the group book for middle grade March, and I was really looking forward to loving this book, and I just didn't. I gave it 3 stars. The thing is, when we started, I was really into it, and I loved like the first third of it. I liked the way it was going and the points and the themes it was bringing up. This is about a boy, now I've forgotten his name, Colin. So it's about a boy named Colin, and he lives with his father, and he's never met his mother. And he has this thing where he counts people's letters. So when people talk to him, he counts the words in their sentence, and he has to say it before he can respond to them. And I guess this really disturbs people in his classroom and stuff like that, so he gets bullied a lot. And he is asked to leave his current school, and I guess he's been asked to leave other schools before. So his father decides to send him to live with his mother that he's never met on her reservation. So she is Native American, I believe Ojibwe. Yeah, so she is Ojibwe, and so then he gets to meet that side of the family and learn more about his Native American heritage. And that sounded really great. I was excited to learn about both his condition and also his Native American heritage. And especially since I felt a real kinship with Colin in the first third of this book, because yeah, like I said, he has this compulsion to count people's letters. And I have this thing that I do, and I wouldn't call it, a compulsion like him. I don't have to say anything out loud, but I do have this thing where I regularly will hear phrases or pick out phrases from people's speech or from movies or whatever, and I have to like organize the letters. And like I have to I do multiple things with them. Like I might try to put them into pairs, and if that doesn't work, I'll try to put them into like 3-letter words, or like match up vowels to consonants and stuff like that. And I do this a lot, and it sometimes like gets in the way of conversations where somebody will talk and I'll get fixated on a specific phrase or name or something. And while I'm doing that, I lose kind of track of what is happening in the conversation. And I've really never talked about that with anybody other than my husband. He's the only one that I've ever mentioned that I do that. And so I felt a connection with Colin that I do a weird thing with people's sentences as well. And so I thought that was the place that he was going with the story, where it was a story about learning to love the little things about your personality and the things that you do, or coming to terms with them. It was about acceptance and family and love and all this stuff. And that seemed where it was going for the first third of the book. And then it turns into a romance. And I hope that's not a spoiler. I mean, I guess it doesn't say that on there, but like I would have liked to have known that this very much turns into a romance for the rest of the book. There are still themes about his counting and about acceptance and all that stuff, but the romance really takes over the plot. And that's just not what I usually go into a middle grade novel looking for. I don't really look for a 13-year-old love story. Like, that's just not my interest. And so as soon as we started getting into that, I very much lost interest in the book. And I still enjoyed the parts where he was learning about his Native American culture, and when he was discussing his like numbers and all that stuff that he does. But I completely lost any interest in the whole love story plot line, and that was probably, I don't know, 70% of the book, I would say. So yeah, I just ended up giving this 3 stars because, like I said, there's things I loved about it, but there's things I really didn't like. And there was one other thing that really bugged me about this book, and that is that the girl in this story introduces Colin to this book called How to Hang a Witch by Adrienne Mather, and they talk about this book a lot. They talk about the themes, they talk about the plot of the book, and it was driving me nuts because I have read that book, and one, it's not a book that's in the same age group, and it doesn't really have anything to do with the plot. But the reason he's talking about it is that James Byrd, the author of this book, is married to Adrienne Mather in real life. So basically he's using his book to promote his wife's book. And for some reason that really bothered me. It didn't seem to bother other people in the group chat, but that just really irritated me for some reason. I'm like, why are you advertising your wife's book? It has nothing to do with the book you're writing. So I have a lot of feelings, obviously. I did not love this book. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it, but if you go into it knowing that there is a love story, maybe you'd be more interested in it as long as you know that's coming. But since I went in not expecting that at all, it really bothered me a lot. And then next I read Look Both Ways, A Tale Told in 10 Blocks by Jason Reynolds. And this is a kind of a collection of short stories that all relate to each other. It's a tale of 10 blocks. So it's 10 different kids or groups of kids walking home from school. It's the same school and they're walking home, but they walk home different directions. Different things happen to them on the way home. And it's just their stories of the things that are going on in their lives. And they very loosely relate to each other because, some characters show up in other stories and stuff like that, and there's kind of like a few things that pop up in all the stories, but for the most part you're just kind of getting a glimpse into each of these kids' lives. And I did appreciate how each of these stories brought up different issues. Some were really kind of subtle and quiet stories, and then others like really leaned into heavier topics and things like that. So it was an enjoyable experience, but I didn't love this book. It just didn't hit me that hard really. I read this a week ago and I can't remember a lot of the topics that it covered. At the time I was enjoying it. The audiobook is really well done because each of these 10 stories are narrated by a different narrator, and every single narrator was excellent. Some of them were some of my favorite narrators, and so I would recommend it on audiobook, but it just didn't stick with me. This is not one that'll, be a new favorite. I love Jason Reynolds in general. Everything I have read so far by him, I've given 5 stars, and I'm giving this 3 stars, a high 3 stars, but it just wasn't memorable for me personally. But I think it was good in the moment of reading it. It just won't stick with me like some of his other books that I've read. And then next I listened to Fortunately the Milk by Neil Gaiman. And this is kind of a shorter book. I don't know how long the book is because I listened to it, but I think the audio was only 30 to 40 minutes long. And this was a lot of fun. It's just about a dad who goes out to buy milk and he takes a long time. So when he comes back, his kids asked what took so long. And he just tells this elaborate story of all the things that happened to him on the way home from buying the milk. And it's just kind of ridiculous, but it is fun and quirky, and I did enjoy it, and I would recommend it as something that you could listen to in the car with your kids, on the way somewhere, because it is short, that it is just kind of fun. And I'm sure actually reading it in person would be fun too, because I kind of peeked at the book online, to look at the inside, and it looked like it had fun pictures and stuff like that. So I think this would be a fun one to pass on to kids, and I probably would listen to this with my kids as well someday. It's narrated by Neil Gaiman, who is an excellent narrator as well as writer. So I would recommend that if you're looking for just a short, fun, quirky kind of book. Oh, and I gave that one 4 stars. I don't think I mentioned that. So now we're moving into the books that I gave 5 stars. So I have 2 that I gave 5 stars. And the first one was the one I started out thinking this was middle grade. But after reading it, I was like, I think it would be more upper middle grade or beginning young adult. And that's Enna Burning by Shannon Hale. And this is the second book in the books of Bayern. So I don't know if I can go into a lot of detail if you haven't read The Goose Girl, which is the first book. But basically we're following Enna, who was a girl that we were introduced to in the first book. And she kind of discovers a secret power, and it's just following her and how she's dealing with this power and with a lot of things that are going on in the country politically and all that stuff between her country, Bayern, and another country. And I really love this. I ended up buddy reading this with Kara from Wild Book Garden, and we both had a really good time reading it. This is a reread. I had read this, a long time ago. I'd read the whole series, and I loved the series, and so I wanted to revisit it. And when I read it originally, this one was my favorite, but this time I think I like Goose Girl better. I still gave this one 5 stars because I think it's just a really good book, but some of the things in here, I was like, well, maybe I loved Goose Girl more, because Goose Girl is more whimsical and fairy tale-like, where this one is definitely more dark. And that's why I'm saying it's leaning towards YA, because there's a lot more actual war battle scenes going on in this. There's a lot more death happening, more serious topics. There's also To give one other content warning, if you want to give this to your kids, there is definitely gaslighting in this book. And so all those things make it where I would say it would be for upper, like a mature middle grade student or young adult, because all that stuff kind of it is big part of the book. And so you want a child that can understand what's happening. But as an adult reading it, I really enjoyed it. I love Enna as a character. She's very strong, and she's dealing with a lot of self-doubt, but she really wants to help her country and help her friends and things like that. And I just absolutely love the friendship group that is in these books, and so I will be continuing the series. I still love it. 5 stars. And the last one is a brand new book that I'm giving 5 stars to, because the last one was a reread. I read Howl's Moving Castle by Dianna Wynne Jones, and I've never read this book or watched the movie, so I really didn't know what I was getting into, but I really loved this book. It was just fun and weird and quirky, but I really liked it. So it's about our main character, Sophie, and Sophie has a run-in with this witch who turns her into an old lady. So she was, I think, in her teens, and now she's this little old lady, and so she's not supposed to tell anybody about her curse, so she thinks the only way she can get rid of it is to go find Howl, who is a local magician who lives in this moving castle in the mountains. And so she goes to the moving castle to try to find a way for him to break the curse. And it is just really entertaining. I love the characters in it. There's like a character who's a fire demon that lives in the fireplace, and I really enjoyed that character. I loved Howl. He's like ultimate, like selfish, narcissistic kind of character, but he's just fun. I really enjoy their interaction and the way Sophie and Howl adapt to, interacting with each other and living in this castle together, and how she's, trying to do what she can to figure out how to break the curse, but then she's also just kind of living her life as this old lady, and just weird things happen. It's just fun. I would highly recommend it. I need to go watch the movie now, because I've never seen it, and I just hear that the movie is really excellent. So that's it. If any of these are ones that you want to talk about, I'd love to hear from you down below. And probably in like a week or so, I'll put out a video where I talk about all the new releases that I am reading this month. I've already read 3, and then I'm in the middle of 2 more. So I'll at least have 5 to talk about in that video next week. And I'll see you next time. Bye.